On the morning of December 31st, 2023, in the quiet suburban town of Bozeman, Montana, Morgan Carter was found dead in his home office with 3 stab wounds to the chest. Rebecca Carter, his 45-year-old wife of 22 years, made the frantic 911 call at 9:47 a.m., claiming that an intruder had broken in and attacked her husband while she was out for her regular morning run. The small Montana community of Bozeman, accustomed to wildlife encounters but not to brutal suburban homicides, was stunned by the violence that had erupted in what neighbors described as one of the most stable and loving households on Maple Ridge Drive. Detective Sarah. Chen arrived at the 2-story colonial home within 15 minutes of the emergency call, her experienced eyes immediately scanning the scene for inconsistencies. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, though a basement window stood partially open, its screen removed and placed carefully on the ground below. Morgan Carter sat slumped in his leather desk chair, blood soaking through his gray sweater and pooling on the hardwood floor beneath him. His reading glasses had fallen to the floor, and his computer screen still displayed the document he had been working on when death came. Before we dive deeper into this case, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what you think about this story. Your engagement helps us bring you more compelling true crime content. Now let's continue. Rebecca Carter sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket provided by the first responding officer, her running clothes still damp with sweat from her morning exercise. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her hazel eyes were red-rimmed from crying as she recounted her version of events to the officers. She explained that she had left the house at 8:30 a.m. for her usual 5-mile run through the neighborhood trails, a routine she maintained religiously 5 days a week. Morgan had been alive and working in his office when she left, she insisted, and when she returned home just after 9:30 a.m., she had found him dead, prompting her immediate call to emergency services. Detective Chen noted in her initial report that Rebecca appeared genuinely distraught, though something about the staging of the crime scene triggered her investigative instincts. The basement window, while open, showed no disturbed dust on the sill, suggesting it hadn't been used as an entry point recently. More significantly, Morgan's office showed none of the typical signs of a struggle one would expect from a surprise attack. His desk was orderly, papers neatly stacked, and aside from the overturned coffee cup that had spilled across some student essays, nothing appeared disturbed. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife from the Carter's own knife block, lay on the floor near Morgan's feet, wiped clean but still bearing traces of blood in the handle's crevices. Morgan Carter's body told a story that would become clearer as the autopsy progressed. 3 stab wounds to the chest and abdomen had caused massive internal bleeding, with the medical examiner later determining that the 3rd wound, which had severed the hepatic artery, would have been fatal within minutes. The defensive wounds on Morgan's hands indicated he had been awake and aware during the attack, attempting to ward off his assailant. The position of his body suggested he had been standing when the first wound was inflicted, then had collapsed back into his chair as his strength failed. Blood spatter analysis would later reveal that the attacker had stood directly in front of Morgan during the assault, striking with deliberate force rather than the frenzied, chaotic pattern typical of crimes of passion. The Bozeman community knew Morgan Carter as more than just an English teacher at Mountain View High School. For 18 years, he had inspired students with his passion for literature, his ability to make Shakespeare relevant to modern teenagers, and his dedication to running the school's award-winning debate team. Former students regularly returned during college breaks to visit him, crediting Mr. Carter with teaching them not just how to write essays, but how to think critically and express themselves with clarity and confidence. Morgan had received the Montana Excellence in Teaching Award 3 years prior, with the citation praising his innovative approaches to classic literature and his mentorship of struggling students who often found their voice in his classroom. Beyond his professional accomplishments, Morgan was known as a devoted family man who had built what appeared to be an ideal marriage with Rebecca, his college sweetheart. They had met at the University of Montana, where Morgan studied English literature, while Rebecca pursued a degree in business administration. Their wedding photos, still displayed prominently throughout their home, showed a young couple radiantly in love, surrounded by friends and family in a ceremony held in the Bridger Mountains. Neighbors described them as the kind of couple who still held hands during evening walks, who hosted legendary summer barbecues, and who seemed to have maintained the spark that so many long-term marriages lose over time. The Carters had no children, a choice they had made consciously, and according to friends, without regret. Morgan and Rebecca poured all their energy into each other and their careers, explained their neighbor, Patricia Holland, during an interview with investigators. They traveled extensively during summer breaks, took cooking classes together, and were always working on some home improvement project. They seemed genuinely content with their life together. This portrait of marital harmony would later contrast sharply with evidence that would emerge as the investigation deepened, revealing fissures in the relationship that the couple had successfully hidden from their social circle. Morgan's home office, where his life ended, reflected his passions and personality. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined two walls, filled with first editions of classic literature, contemporary fiction, and volumes of poetry. His desk held photographs of Rebecca from various stages of their marriage, along with mementos from grateful students, a paperweight made by a former pupil now studying at Yale, a signed copy of a novel by a student who had become a published author, and letters of appreciation that Morgan had saved over the years. This was the sanctuary where Morgan spent his evenings and weekends, grading papers, planning lessons, and working on the novel he had been writing for the past 5 years. The manuscript, nearly complete at 85,000 words, sat in a neat stack on the corner of his desk, representing years of creative effort that would now never see publication. Rebecca Carter's background provided important context for understanding the dynamics of her marriage to Morgan. She had built a successful career as a financial consultant, working from a home office and traveling occasionally to meet with clients throughout Montana and Wyoming. Her income had actually exceeded Morgan's teacher's salary, allowing the couple to afford their comfortable home and regular international vacations. Colleagues described Rebecca as meticulous, detail-oriented, and intensely private about her personal life. "She was always professional and competent," said Gerald Thompson, a fellow financial consultant who had worked with Rebecca for over a decade, but she never really opened up about her marriage or personal feelings. Everything was always fine or great when you asked how things were going at home. The morning of Morgan's murder had been unseasonably warm for late December in Montana, with temperatures reaching the mid-40s, and much of the snow that had fallen earlier in the week already melting. Rebecca's running route, which she provided in detail to investigators, took her through the neighborhood and onto a popular trail system that connected to a small park about 2 miles from her home. Several neighbors reported seeing Rebecca jogging that morning, though the specific times varied and would later become crucial to establishing a timeline. Patricia Holland recalled seeing Rebecca running past her house around 8:45 a.m., while another neighbor, James Woodward, thought he saw her returning home closer to 9:15 a.m., significantly earlier than Rebecca had claimed in her initial statement. Detective Chen's canvass of the neighborhood yielded the first major break in the case when Douglas Finch, who lived 2 houses down from the Carters, mentioned that his home security system included cameras covering not only his property, but portions of the street and sidewalk. "I installed them after a series of car break-ins last year," Finch explained. "The cameras record continuously and save the footage for 30 days before overwriting." This surveillance footage would prove to be the linchpin of the investigation, providing irrefutable evidence that would contradict Rebecca's account of her whereabouts during the critical time period when Morgan was killed. The security camera footage, which Detective Chen reviewed within hours of learning about its existence, showed Rebecca leaving her home at 8:32 a.m., consistent with her statement. However, the footage also captured her returning at 8:54 a.m., entering through the front door and remaining inside for approximately 17 minutes. At 9:11 a.m., the cameras showed Rebecca leaving the house again, this time in different running clothes than she had worn earlier, and she didn't return until 9:43 a.m., just 4 minutes before she made the 911 call. This timeline created a window of opportunity during which Rebecca had been inside the house with Morgan, contradicting her claim of being on a continuous run throughout the morning. Morgan's autopsy, conducted by Dr. James Whitmore, the county medical examiner, provided crucial information about the timing and nature of his death. Based on body temperature, rigor mortis, and blood coagulation patterns, Dr. Whitmore determined that Morgan had died between 8:50 a.m. and 9:10 a.m., precisely during the period when the security footage showed Rebecca had been inside the house. The 3 stab wounds showed a pattern that Dr. Whitmore described as deliberate and focused rather than frenzied. The first wound had struck Morgan's lower abdomen, likely causing him to double over in pain. The second had penetrated his upper chest, missing the heart but puncturing a lung. The third and fatal wound had struck just below the ribcage, severing the hepatic artery and causing rapid exsanguination. Detective Chen obtained a warrant to search the Carter home more thoroughly, and the subsequent investigation revealed several pieces of damning evidence. In the laundry room, investigators found Rebecca's original running outfit stuffed into the bottom of a hamper, beneath several days' worth of other clothing. When tested, the outfit showed trace amounts of blood spatter on the sleeves and hem, despite appearing to have been laundered. More significantly, investigators discovered that Rebecca had recently purchased life insurance policies on both herself and Morgan, with each policy valued at $750,000. The policies had been acquired just 6 months before the murder, and Rebecca had been the one to initiate the process and select the coverage amounts. Financial records obtained through warrant revealed that the Carters' seemingly comfortable lifestyle had been masking significant financial stress. Morgan's modest teacher salary had remained relatively stable over the years, but Rebecca's consulting income had declined sharply in the 18 months before the murder. Client reviews and communications suggested that her work quality had deteriorated, leading to lost accounts and reduced revenue. The couple's joint accounts showed increasing credit card debt, delayed mortgage payments, and transfers from savings accounts to cover monthly expenses. Most concerning to investigators was the discovery that Rebecca had been secretly withdrawing money from their retirement accounts, incurring substantial early withdrawal penalties to maintain their lifestyle and hide the extent of their financial difficulties from Morgan. Interviews with Morgan's colleagues at Mountain View High School painted a picture of a man who had been increasingly concerned about his marriage in the months before his death. Sarah Mackenzie, a fellow English teacher and Morgan's closest friend at the school, revealed during her interview with Detective Chen that Morgan had confided his worries about Rebecca's behavior. He said she had become distant and secretive, Mackenzie recalled, her voice heavy with emotion. He mentioned that she was spending more time in her home office with the door closed, that she seemed irritable and on edge. Morgan wondered if she was having an affair, or if there were financial problems she wasn't telling him about. He said he'd tried to talk to her several times, but she always insisted everything was fine and became defensive when he pressed for details. The investigation took a darker turn when Detective Chen's team discovered Rebecca's internet search history on her laptop, recovered through forensic analysis, even though she had attempted to delete her browsing history. The searches, conducted over several weeks leading up to Morgan's death, included disturbing queries such as, how long does it take to die from stab wound? Can life insurance be collected if spouse is murdered? How to stage a break-in? And most chillingly, do police test for blood after washing? Clothes. These searches demonstrated clear premeditation and suggested that Rebecca had been planning her husband's murder for at least a month before. Carrying it out, the murder weapon itself provided additional evidence linking Rebecca to the crime. The kitchen knife, part of an expensive German cutlery set the Carters had received as a wedding gift, bore microscopic traces of cleaning solution in its handle, indicating someone had attempted to sanitize it after the attack. More significantly, a tiny blood droplet found in the joint between the blade and handle contained a mixture of Morgan's blood and DNA from epithelial cells that matched Rebecca's genetic profile. This evidence placed the knife in Rebecca's hands with Morgan's blood on it, directly contradicting her claim of having been away from the house during the murder. 5 days after Morgan Carter's death, on January 5, 2024, Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the Carter home with a warrant for Rebecca's arrest on charges of first-degree murder. Rebecca answered the door in business casual attire, having apparently been working in her home office when the police arrived. Her composure, which had seemed appropriate in the immediate aftermath of discovering her husband's body, now appeared more calculated as Detective Chen read her Miranda rights and placed her under arrest. "You're making a terrible mistake," Rebecca said, her voice steady and controlled. "I loved Morgan. I would never hurt him." Despite these protestations, she offered no resistance as she was handcuffed and led to the unmarked police vehicle waiting in her driveway. The evidence against Rebecca Carter was substantial and multi-layered, combining physical forensics, digital evidence, and witness testimony into a comprehensive narrative that prosecutors believed demonstrated not only her guilt, but clear premeditation. Assistant District Attorney Michael Foster took lead on the case, working closely with Detective Chen to build a timeline that accounted for every minute of the morning of December 31st. The security camera footage became the backbone of this timeline, providing irrefutable visual evidence that Rebecca had been inside the house during the exact period when Morgan was killed. Despite her claims of being on a continuous run, the prosecution's theory of the case centered on financial motive, arguing that Rebecca had murdered Morgan to collect the $750,000 life insurance, pay out and eliminate the partner, who would inevitably discover her financial mismanagement and the couple's deteriorating economic situation. Foster's team prepared a detailed analysis of the Carters' finances, showing how Rebecca's declining consulting income, combined with her attempts to maintain their lifestyle through debt and retirement account withdrawals, had created an unsustainable situation that was rapidly approaching a crisis point. Rebecca Carter faced a choice, Foster would later tell the jury during opening statements. Either admit to her husband that she had been lying about their finances and face the consequences of that deception, or eliminate the problem permanently and collect enough money to start fresh. Rebecca's defense team, led by experienced criminal attorney Thomas Brennan, faced the challenge of explaining away the physical evidence, the security camera footage, and the incriminating internet searches. Brennan's strategy focused on creating reasonable doubt by suggesting alternative theories of the crime and attacking the prosecution's circumstantial evidence. The absence of eyewitnesses to the actual killing means the prosecution's case relies entirely on inference and interpretation, Brennan argued in pretrial motions. Security cameras show Rebecca entering and leaving her home, but they don't show what happened inside. The prosecution wants you to assume she killed her husband during that time, but assumptions aren't proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial of State of Montana versus Rebecca Carter began on June 3, 2024, in the Gallatin County Courthouse in Bozeman. The case had attracted significant media attention, with legal analysts noting that the combination of a teacher's murder, substantial life insurance policies, and seemingly damning security camera footage made it a compelling courtroom drama. The jury selection process took 4 days, with both sides carefully questioning potential jurors about their views on circumstantial evidence, life insurance, and whether they could remain impartial despite extensive pretrial publicity. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 28 to 67, with professional backgrounds spanning from retail workers to engineers. Judge Elizabeth Warner, known for her no-nonsense approach to courtroom management and her careful attention to evidentiary rules, presided over the trial. In her preliminary instructions to the jury, Judge Warner emphasized the prosecution's burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt and cautioned jurors against allowing sympathy for the victim or prejudice against the defendant to influence their deliberations. Your decision must be based solely on the evidence presented in this courtroom and the law as I instruct you to apply it, she told the assembled jurors. This is one of the most important civic duties you will ever perform, and I trust you to approach it with the seriousness and care it deserves. Prosecutor Michael Foster's opening statement laid out a methodical case built on what he called a web of evidence that tightens around the defendant with every thread we examine. Standing before the jury, Foster walked them through the prosecution's timeline, starting with Rebecca's early morning departure from the house and her unexplained return during the critical window when Morgan was killed. The defendant wants you to believe she never came back inside, that she ran continuously for over an hour, Foster said, his voice conveying just the right mix of skepticism and reasonableness. But Douglas Finch's security cameras tell a different story. They show Rebecca Carter entering her home at 8:54 a.m. and not leaving again until 9:11 a.m. 17 minutes during which her husband was stabbed 3 times and left to die in his office chair. Foster then previewed the financial evidence, explaining how Rebecca's declining income and secret depletion of their retirement savings had created a financial crisis she had hidden from her husband. The defendant faced exposure, Foster told the jury. Morgan Carter was a careful, responsible person who paid attention to their finances. Rebecca knew it was only a matter of time before he discovered what she had done, before he learned that while he thought they were financially secure, she had actually been spending their savings and accumulating debt to maintain appearances. The prosecutor concluded his opening by addressing the internet searches. The defendant's own computer will tell you what she was planning. She researched how to stage a break-in, how to clean blood evidence, how long it takes someone to die from stab wounds. These aren't the searches of an innocent person. They're the research of someone planning a murder. Defense attorney Thomas Brennan's opening statement took a markedly different approach, acknowledging the prosecution's evidence, while arguing that it told an incomplete story, open to multiple interpretations. Yes, Rebecca Carter entered her home during her morning run, Brennan told the jury. She's never denied that. She came back because she forgot her phone and wanted it with her in case of an emergency on the trail. She went inside, grabbed her phone, used the bathroom, and left again. Nothing about that is suspicious or criminal. Brennan argued that the prosecution's theory required the jury to believe Rebecca had committed a brutal murder, cleaned herself up, changed clothes, and resumed her run in just 17 minutes, all while leaving minimal physical evidence. The defense attorney then addressed the financial motive, arguing that while the Carters had experienced some financial stress, it was hardly at a crisis level that would drive someone to murder. Business fluctuates, Brennan said. Rebecca's consulting income had declined, but she was actively working to rebuild her client base. Yes, they had drawn from savings and retirement accounts, but that's what those accounts are for, to use when needed. The prosecution wants you to believe that this normal financial stress somehow transformed a devoted wife into a cold-blooded killer. But that narrative requires a leap of logic that the evidence simply doesn't support. Detective Sarah Chen was the prosecution's first witness, methodically establishing the basic facts of the case. Chen described receiving the 911 call, arriving at the scene, and her initial observations that had triggered her investigative instincts. The detective's testimony was delivered with professional precision, carefully avoiding speculation while guiding the jury through the evidence collection process. When Foster asked about her first impressions of the crime scene, Chen replied, "The basement window being open seemed staged. There was no disturbance of the dust on the windowsill, no footprints in the soil outside despite recent rain, and no logical reason for an intruder to carefully remove the screen and place it on the ground rather than just breaking in, if their intent was to commit a violent crime." The security camera footage became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case when Douglas Finch took the stand to authenticate the video and explain his home security system. Finch, a retired engineer, provided detailed testimony about the camera specifications, recording quality, and timestamp accuracy. "The system uses network time protocol to ensure accurate timestamps," Finch explained. "The margin of error is less than 1 second. When the footage shows Rebecca Carter entering her home at 8:54 a.m., you can be absolutely certain of that time." The courtroom fell silent as the prosecution played the relevant segments of footage on large monitors visible to the jury, showing Rebecca's early morning departure, her return during the critical window, and her final departure just minutes before calling 911. Dr. James Whitmore, the medical examiner, provided testimony that aligned the timing of Morgan's death with the period when security cameras showed Rebecca inside the house. Using detailed autopsy photographs and diagrams, Dr. Whitmore explained how he had determined the time of death through multiple factors, including body temperature, rigor mortis progression, and blood coagulation patterns. "Based on all available indicators, I determined that Mr. Carter died between 8:50 a.m. and 9:10 a.m., Whitmore testified. "This window encompasses the time when security footage shows Mrs. Carter was inside the residence." The medical examiner's testimony about the nature of the wounds, particularly the deliberate, focused pattern of the 3 stab wounds, countered any notion that Morgan's death had resulted from a struggle with an intruder. The financial motive came into sharp focus when forensic accountant Jennifer Wu took the stand to walk the jury through the Carters' financial records. Wu had prepared detailed charts and graphs showing the decline in Rebecca's income, the couple's mounting debt, and the systematic depletion of their retirement accounts. Mrs. Carter had been withdrawing approximately $3,000 per month from their retirement accounts for 18 months before the murder, Wu testified. Including early withdrawal penalties, this had reduced their retirement savings by approximately $80,000. Meanwhile, credit card debt had increased to $47,000, and they had begun missing mortgage payments. The financial situation was deteriorating rapidly and would have become impossible to hide from Mr. Carter much longer. The testimony took an even more damning turn when Wu explained her analysis of the life insurance policies Rebecca had purchased 6 months before the murder. Mrs. Carter initiated contact with the insurance agent, selected the coverage amounts, and completed all the paperwork, Wu testified. The $750,000 policy on Mr. Carter's life was significantly higher than typical coverage for someone in his profession and income bracket. When I calculate the financial benefit to Mrs. Carter from Mr. Carter's death, including the insurance payout, elimination of his income tax burden, and full control of remaining assets, the total exceeds $900,000. During cross-examination, defense attorney Brennan challenged Wu's characterization of the Carters' financial situation as a crisis. Isn't it true that even with the debt you've described, the Carters had a positive net worth of over $400,000? Brennan asked. Wu acknowledged this was accurate, but maintained that the trajectory was unsustainable. And isn't it common for married couples to purchase life insurance to protect each other financially? Brennan continued. Again, Wu agreed, though she noted that the timing and amounts were nonetheless relevant to understanding Rebecca's potential motive. The prosecution's most technically complex testimony came from digital forensics expert Dr. Marcus Webb, who had examined Rebecca's laptop, phone, and internet router to recover her search history and online activity. Dr. Webb explained in meticulous detail how even deleted browsing history could be recovered from multiple sources, including the browser's cache files, the operating system's record of file access, and the router's DNS query logs. Mrs. Carter used private browsing mode for many of her searches, believing this would prevent them from being traced, Dr. Webb testified. However, private browsing only prevents local storage in the browser itself. The searches were still logged by her internet service provider and were recoverable from her computer system files. The courtroom fell into an uncomfortable silence as Dr. Webb methodically presented Rebecca's search history on large monitors visible to the jury. The queries, displayed with dates and exact timestamps, created a chilling narrative of premeditation. November 18, 2023. Life insurance payout process after spouse death. November 22, 2023. Can life insurance be denied if spouse is murdered? November 29, 2023. How to stage a burglary. December 8, 2023. How long does it take to die from stab wound to abdomen? December 15, 2023. Do washing machines remove all blood from clothing? December 22, 2023. Difference between first-degree and second-degree murder. December 28, 2023. Do police check security cameras in neighborhood? Each search query was displayed long enough for the jury to read and absorb its implications. Several jurors took detailed notes, while others simply stared at the screens with expressions that ranged from shock to disgust. When Prosecutor Foster asked Dr. Webb for his professional assessment of this search pattern, the expert replied, "In my 15 years of digital forensics work, I've analyzed hundreds of cases. This search history demonstrates clear premeditation and planning. These aren't casual curiosity searches. They're systematically investigating specific aspects of committing murder and avoiding detection." The physical evidence linking Rebecca to the crime was presented through the testimony of forensic scientist Dr. Patricia Olmsted, who had processed the blood evidence and DNA analysis. Dr. Olmsted explained how the knife recovered from Morgan's office had been partially cleaned, but still retained microscopic blood evidence in the crevices where the blade met the handle. We identified Mr. Carter's blood, mixed with epithelial cells that matched Mrs. Carter's DNA profile, Olmsted testified. This indicates that Mrs. Carter handled the knife while it had Mr. Carter's blood on it, which directly contradicts her statement that she never touched the murder weapon. Dr. Olmsted then addressed the running clothes found hidden in the Carter's laundry hamper. Despite having been washed, luminol testing had revealed blood spatter patterns on the sleeves and lower hem, consistent with someone standing in front of a victim during a stabbing. The spatter pattern shows high-velocity impact spatter, which is characteristic of an arterial wound, Olmsted explained, using demonstration materials to show the jury how blood travels during such an injury. The pattern and location on the clothing are consistent with someone standing approximately 2 to 3 feet in front of Mr. Carter when the fatal wound was inflicted. During cross-examination, defense attorney Brennan worked to raise questions about the reliability of blood evidence that had been through a washing machine. Dr. Olmsted, isn't it true that washing clothes in hot water can destroy blood evidence? Brennan asked. Olmsted acknowledged this was possible, but explained that in this case, enough blood had soaked into the fabric fibers to survive one wash cycle. Brennan also questioned whether the DNA on the knife handle might have been transferred innocently, since Rebecca lived in the home and could have handled the knife for cooking purposes before the murder. Olmsted conceded this theoretical possibility, but noted that the mixing of her DNA with Morgan's blood suggested a different scenario. The prosecution's case included emotional testimony from Morgan's sister, Jennifer Lawson, who flew in from Colorado to speak about her brother's life and their final conversations. Jennifer described Morgan as a devoted husband who'd been increasingly worried about his marriage in the months before his death. He called me 3 weeks before he died, Jennifer testified, her voice breaking with emotion. He said Rebecca had been acting strangely, spending more time locked in her office, becoming defensive when he asked about finances. Morgan said he loved her and wanted to work through whatever was wrong, but he felt like she was shutting him out. This testimony provided crucial context for understanding the state of the Carters' marriage. Beneath its outwardly happy appearance, Jennifer also testified about the devastating impact of her brother's death on their family, including their elderly parents, who had been too grief-stricken to attend the trial. My brother was supposed to have decades of life ahead of him, Jennifer said through tears. He was an incredible teacher who changed students' lives every single day. He was working on a novel he'd dreamed of publishing. He and Rebecca were planning a trip to Italy for their 23rd anniversary. All of that was stolen from him, stolen from all of us who loved him. And for what? Money? The prosecution rested its case after 8 days of testimony, having presented what Michael Foster called overwhelming evidence of premeditation, motive, and opportunity. In his summary to the judge before the defense began presenting its case, Foster argued that the security camera footage alone was sufficient to prove Rebecca had been in the house during the murder, and when combined with the financial motive, internet searches, and physical evidence, the case against her was virtually incontrovertible. The defense will try to create doubt where none reasonably exists, Foster told Judge Warner. But we've presented multiple independent lines of evidence that all point to the same conclusion. Rebecca Carter murdered her husband for financial gain. Defense attorney Thomas Brennan opened his case by calling Rebecca Carter herself to the stand, a risky but calculated decision designed to humanize his client and allow her to tell her own story directly to the jury. Rebecca, dressed conservatively in a dark blue suit, appeared composed as she was sworn in and took her seat in the witness box. Under Brennan's gentle questioning, she began by describing her 22-year marriage to Morgan, their meeting in college, their decision not to have children, and the life they had built together in Bozeman. "Did you love your husband?" Brennan asked, establishing the foundation of her testimony. "With all my heart," Rebecca replied, her voice steady but emotional. "Morgan was my best friend, my partner in everything. We had our struggles like any couple, but I never stopped loving him. The idea that I could have hurt him is unbearable to me." Rebecca then provided her account of the morning of December 31st, acknowledging that she had returned home during her run, just as the security cameras showed. I realized about 20 minutes into my run that I'd forgotten my phone, she explained. I like to have it with me in case of an emergency, so I ran back home, went inside, grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, used the bathroom, and left again. Morgan was alive and working in his office. I called out goodbye and he called back that he loved me. Those were the last words we ever exchanged. Rebecca's explanation for the blood evidence on her running clothes was that she had discovered Morgan's body, tried desperately to help him, and gotten blood on herself in the process. I didn't notice the blood on my clothes at first, she testified. I was in shock, just trying to process what I was seeing. Later, after the police left and I was staying with friends, I realized my running outfit had blood on it. I know I should have turned it over to police, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted to wash away that horrible memory, so I threw it in the laundry. This explanation required the jury to believe that Rebecca had changed out of her blood-splattered clothes before calling 911, then changed back into different running clothes to maintain her alibi, only to later wash the original outfit. A sequence of events that seemed improbable given the timeline. When Brennan asked about the internet searches, Rebecca's explanation centered on research for a crime novel she claimed to have been planning to write. "I've always loved mystery novels," she testified. "After Morgan started working on his book, I thought I might try writing one too. Mine was going to be about a woman who murders her husband for insurance money and tries to make it look like a break-in. I was researching how someone would actually do that, so I could write it realistically. I never imagined those searches would be used against me like this." This explanation, while addressing the searches, required the jury to accept an extraordinary coincidence that Rebecca had been researching how to commit the exact crime she was later accused of committing purely as fiction research, just weeks before her husband was actually killed in that manner. Rebecca's testimony about their finances acknowledged the declining income and debt, but characterized it as manageable stress rather than a crisis. "Yes, my business had slowed down, and we were using some savings to maintain our lifestyle," she admitted. "But we had substantial assets. We weren't facing bankruptcy or anything remotely like that. I was confident my business would rebound. There was absolutely no reason to panic, and certainly no reason to do something as horrific as murder my husband for money I didn't desperately need." Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Foster methodically dismantled Rebecca's explanations, highlighting the inconsistencies and improbabilities in her account. "Mrs. Carter, you expect this jury to believe that you were researching how to murder a spouse for insurance money just weeks before your husband was actually murdered for insurance money, and that's just a coincidence?" Foster asked, his skepticism evident. Rebecca maintained this was exactly what happened, that the timing was unfortunate but coincidental. Foster then pressed her on the 17-minute window when she was inside the house. "In those 17 minutes, you grabbed your phone, used the bathroom, called goodbye to your husband, and left again?" "That's your testimony." Rebecca confirmed this account, despite the obvious question of why such simple tasks would require 17 minutes. The prosecutor's most effective cross-examination involved the blood evidence, and Rebecca's claim that she had changed clothes, called 911, then later washed the bloodied outfit. "Help me understand the timeline, Mrs. Carter," Foster said, walking to the exhibit table. "You discovered your husband's body, got blood on your clothes, changed into different clothes, made the 911 call, and then at some later point decided to wash the original bloodied outfit. Why would you change clothes before calling for help if your husband was dying?" Rebecca struggled to provide a coherent explanation, eventually saying she wasn't thinking clearly and couldn't remember her exact reasoning. Foster let the answer hang in the air before moving to his next question, allowing the jury to contemplate the implausibility of her account. The defense called Dr. Stephen Martinez, a forensic pathologist who had reviewed Dr. Whitmore's autopsy report and crime scene photographs. Dr. Martinez testified that while he agreed with many of Dr. Whitmore's findings, he believed the time of death window should be broader, potentially extending from 8:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., rather than the narrower window the prosecution had proposed. "Time of death determination is not an exact science," Dr. Martinez explained. "Multiple factors can affect body temperature and rigor mortis. While Dr. Whitmore's estimate is reasonable, I believe the evidence is consistent with a broader window that would allow for the possibility that Mr. Carter was killed after Mrs. Carter left on her second run. This testimony was designed to create reasonable doubt by suggesting Morgan could have been killed by someone else after Rebecca left the house. However, under cross-examination, Prosecutor Foster got Dr. Martinez to acknowledge that even his broader time window was most consistent with death, occurring during the period when Rebecca was inside the house. Dr. Martinez, you're not saying Dr. Whitmore was wrong about the time of death, are you? Foster asked. You're just saying the window could be slightly broader, correct? Martinez agreed. And even with your broader window, isn't the most likely time